Well, good afternoon. It's 4:30 here in Cincinnati, and we are about to begin the first audio and video lecture for uh, Business 101 Introduction to Business. And as you can see, chapter one is taking risks and making profits with a dynamic business environment. Then we will go to chapter two, which is understanding economics and how it affects business. And then chapter three, doing business in global markets. The learning goals for this chapter are to describe the relationship between profit and risk and show how businesses and nonprofits can raise the standard of living for all. Compare and contrast being an entrepreneur and working for others. We'll talk more about entrepreneurship later in the course. Analyze the effects of the economic environment and taxes on businesses. Describe the effects of technology on businesses. And then we will also hopefully be able to discuss and answer how businesses can meet and beat competition, analyze social changes affecting businesses, identify what businesses must do to meet global challenges, including war and terrorism, something that really must be considered, especially given the events of the last couple of weeks in the Middle East, and then review how past trends are being repeated in the present and what those trends may mean for tomorrow's college graduates. Goods and services. These are the primary things that businesses are in. Even a nonprofit business has something that it offers, most normally in the form of a service. A good is something we can hold, something we can touch, feel, sense, smell, etc. Use the five senses to see. As I say, whole, of course, some things are larger than whole, like automobiles and refrigerators and things like that. Services, however, are not tangible products. There are things like education, insurance, and notice there's talks about healthcare and also things like entertainment and then recreation, leisure time, things we do with our leisure time. And to be successful, a business must be able to market these goods and get them to places where people find them, they see them, they need them, they purchase them, and then come back for repeat purchases. I'm going to blow these slides up by just a little bit here so they can be seen a little bit better. Now this slide talks about business, pardon me, business and entrepreneurship. A business is something that operates to provide goods and services to people. And of course, it provides those where it can make a profit. If they don't make a profit, they won't stay in business. As simple as that. An entrepreneur, pardon me, is someone who normally starts a business. We think of people being entrepreneurs starting businesses. Some of the great entrepreneurs that we can think of in the recent 30 or so years are people like Bill Gates, the late Steve Jobs, and folks of that nature who started businesses virtually from scratch. But we can go back before that, think of people like Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, Harvey Firestone, pardon me, and a few other people who did that. So an entrepreneur is someone who not only risks his money, but he or she also risks time and other things to start a business. Now, I'm staying away from the last term, manage, because many times entrepreneurs are very good at starting something, but they're not necessarily real good at managing it through. So a lot of times you see entrepreneurs will start something and they'll have a great idea, get it up and running, and then they'll sell it to somebody else. Or they'll bring somebody else in to run it for them, pardon me, while they're out looking for something else to do. The success of a business is usually based on somebody finding a need that consumers have are addressing a need that they have and then developing something and bring it to market that satisfies those needs. Sometimes it's a want, other times it's a need, but they need to be able to do that. Now we have three things to look at here, and they're all pretty simple: revenue, profit, and loss. Revenue is all the money that an organization brings in over a specified amount of time. And it does this, of course, by selling the products that it makes or the services that it offers. Profit is the amount of money the business retains after paying all its operating expenses. And these things are salaries, they're taxes, it's rent, it's money due on loans, etc. And then loss is when everything is gone out and nothing's coming in. In other words, there's more going out, there's more being paid out, salaries, etc., than the company is making by selling products or offering its services. Now, we talked just a little bit about risk. And when we get later into the course, and one of the bonus chapters that we'll do in week 8, we'll talk more about risk. Now, risk here, as the slide shows it, is talking about people who are entrepreneurs who are willing to take a risk on losing money to start up a business that may or may not ever earn a dollar. Or may never even last very long. Now, we need to realize that not everybody in business makes the same amount of profit. That's a pretty simple thing to say. And traditional businesses, depending upon where they are and what they are, may have a margin of profit of something like 3%. So they're taking in 3% more than what they're paying out for all their expenses. That's not a lot of money, but if it's large enough and spread over a long period of time, it can be a fair amount of money. Obviously, businesses take risks. If they didn't take risks, they would probably no longer be around. And so what they need to understand, and what you need to understand, is thinking about starting a small business or maybe becoming an entrepreneur, is that the more risk you take, the greater the return on that risk will be. Now, that's a very simple thing to say, and we're going to talk more about risk, and we're talking more about opening a small business as we go through the course. But risk is there. It's involved. Now, some businesses you start, the risk will be less if you, for instance, if you open a franchise, or you become like a good friend of mine who's retiring today, become an insurance agent with an established company like State Farm or Allstate or something of this nature, where we don't think of those as franchises, but in a way, that's exactly what they are. Now, this particular slide talks about how your tax dollars are used, how my tax dollars are used. And there's a whole raft of things we can go through here. Things like libraries, schools, hospitals, recreational facilities like parks, etc. And of course, we also pay for police protection and fire protection, among other things. People will always, as far as I know, as long as I can remember, complain about paying taxes. But I want you to look at the list that is shown here and think to yourself, what is it that I don't want to pay taxes to get one of these services? Okay, I don't want playgrounds. I don't have children, so maybe I don't need to do that. And I don't go to the library and take out books, so maybe I don't need to do that either. But we have to think about what we're doing is for the greater good. We can talk about tax dollars being misused and things. That's a different situation. This is simply saying this is what our tax dollars are traditionally used for. standard of living. The United States has one of the highest standards of living in the world. It is, by the way, not the highest. Has one of the highest. What this is the amount of goods, as the slide says, the amount of goods and services that people can buy with the money they have. Now, I want to point one thing out here to you and talk about the money they have. When you have money, when you get the money from a salary or some other kind of money that you have coming in, you can do one of two things with the money. Now, I'm talking about money that you have left over after you've paid your expenses, mortgage or rent, for food, clothing, utilities, etc. You can do one of two things with that money. You can either save it or you can spend it. Now, someone will say to me, well, I'm going to save half of what I have left over from my paycheck. Let's say paycheck's $100. I'm going to save 50 of it. I'm going to spend 50 of it. No, you're still making a choice to either spend or save. You didn't spend that $50 you put in the bank, or you invested someplace else, and you didn't save the amount of money you spent. So you have two choices, and this is the money just left over. I like to call it discretionary spending. Some people will call it disposable. It means the same thing as what I have left to spend or to save after I have paid all my expenses. Quality of life takes in all sorts of things. One of the biggest things about quality of life is something that we take near and dear to us as citizens of the United States, and that's freedom. Now, it talks here about political freedom, but that freedom that we have is imbued in our politics. It's endorsed very prominently in the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. Of course, the first 10 amendments are known as the Bill of Rights. So we think of quality of life, but it goes more than just that freedom. It gets to the quality of our education. It gets to the quality of our environment. It gets to the amount of time that we can spend doing whatever we want to do. And that is not, and I'm not talking about going to work here. I'm talking about we can sit at home and watch television. We can sit on our back porch if we have one, or on our patio or front porch and read. We can walk down the street. We could go and enjoy a ball game or some other type of entertainment. So we're allowed to do those things because we have this this social system in our country that promotes this freedom of choice, freedom of action, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this is an old story here, or not an old story. This is an old thing that we think about. We tend to mistake this word for stockholder. A stockholder is an individual who owns, or could be a corporation, by the way, or an institution, who owns stock in a company, and he or she or the institution buys that company's stock with the hopes, in many cases, of earning a dividend. That doesn't always happen, and companies are not required to pay dividends, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But we tend to think that stockholder and stakeholder are the same thing, and they're not. And if you notice, stakeholders are customers, they're suppliers, it's the government, it's the area in which the company operates, known as its community. It can be investment people. It can be a number of things. And you will notice that stockholder is a stakeholder. So we can say that all stockholders are stakeholders, but we cannot say that all stakeholders are stockholders. And just to give you an example of this thing with suppliers, Toyota Motor Company, when it wants to bring out a new product, a new automobile, or perhaps it wants to re-engineer what it has, the company calls in its suppliers and they say to them, this is what we want to do. Can you deliver the product that we need? Perfect example of stakeholder. There are probably other ones. I just happen to know that example of of Toyota, and that's why I share it with you. Outsourcing, we know what that is. It's a contentious issue. That's where American companies, when we're talking about the United States, American companies forge a business relationship with a company in a foreign country to produce their goods. And the reverse of that is insourcing, which is foreign companies opening manufacturing facilities in the United States. Toyota does this, has one in Georgetown, Kentucky. Honda has a plant in Maryville, Ohio, and a couple of other places. And I only point those out because those are local and I remember them fairly easily. But there are others. And by the way, I want to point out to you, and I think we talk about this a little bit later on in the course, all outsourcing in the United States is not bad. We always think of outsourcing as being bad, because the example that I use is an American company, contracting with a company in a foreign country to produce their goods. But that's not always outsourcing. Sometimes it's American companies contracting with other American companies to take on some business service. Nonprofit organization is in business to most likely provide a service. Their goals are much different than a for-profit organization, and obviously they're not in business to make a profit. They get a lot of their funding sometimes from government, sometimes from other sources. Many of them do a lot of fundraising. But most nonprofits will have an element within it that does make a profit. You'll see that when you do the video review of Goodwill, which is chapter 17 or chapter 18. I kind of have a station right now, one of those two chapters. And so it's very important that they do show some type of profit. These are some well-known nonprofits in the United States. I'm not going to go over everything that's here. United Way, certainly most of us know, and Salvation Army is another one, and also the Red Cross. This just gives you some idea of keeping strong employees at nonprofits. And what I want to say to you is that it takes a special type person to work for a nonprofit. We can look at these bullets on this slide. Talks about strong and realistic goals and having the employees work with their clients, et cetera, et cetera. But nonprofit work is emotionally tiring. It's emotionally taxing because in many cases people are getting involved with their clients and their personal lives and things of that nature. And I'm not here to suggest that's not good. What I'm here to suggest is that it is taxing. And so you really need to find, if you're a nonprofit organization, you need to find an individual who has a passion for doing this, a passion for working with them. I worked for a nonprofit for a number of years, and so I have some kind of an idea of what it's like. Now, I wasn't dealing directly with clients. I did something a little bit different for the nonprofit. I was vice president of operations, but this is something that we need to understand. Social entrepreneurs, people who promote social initiatives, and they normally help start up and sometimes manage nonprofit organizations. But they are there to, in many cases, fill a void between what traditional nonprofits are doing and offering, what charitable organizations, many of, if not all of them, are nonprofit organizations, and what governments try to offer. So it's very interesting here. There's a profile of this gentleman who won the Nobel Prize for starting the Grameen Bank in India. And we don't need to go a whole lot further than that, but these people are different, and they're trying to fit a niche and find people who need the services that they're providing. And normally speaking, as I said before, they're trying to step into a void that is not filled by government, by traditional nonprofits, and perhaps by charitable organizations as well. Well, this gives us some ups and downs of entrepreneurship. You're free to either succeed or fail, and you're going to make your own decisions. There's nobody around there to help you out. Possible, quite possible that you can get immensely wealthy, and of course you have the hiring decisions. But look at what's the downside. As I already talked about the top one. You don't get a vacation. You don't get time off. You don't have some of the perks and amenities that many companies offer to their employees to keep them. By the way, you'll see one of those when you do the review of SAS Corporation. So entrepreneurship's great, but it's not for everybody. The biggest thing to think about entrepreneurship, we go back from the original slide, it's taking a risk. Are you willing to do that? If you're willing to do that, the sky's the limit. Understand that many people are going to fail before they succeed. So it's something you need to think about. And you don't want to jump into something before you really investigate everything that's around. Well, let's just ask who takes the entrepreneurial challenge. We find that there are more women and minorities doing this today than we have thought about it. People do this quite often, et cetera. And so, you know, you really can't pick anybody out who becomes an entrepreneur. You can say, well, that guy's an entrepreneur or that woman's an entrepreneur. It's just something that comes along, and often we're surprised at somebody that takes that leap. This just slide here with Oprah Winfrey talks about networking for minority business, a spotlight on small business in the company. Excuse me, it's in your textbook. I encourage you to read it, but it's not something that's required. Now, here we are talking about something that is very fundamental to the United States, and these are the factors of production. And the factors of production are land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. I did not mention knowledge because knowledge has been added in the recent years. When I first started teaching this course 10 or 15 years ago, we didn't talk about knowledge, but knowledge has become part of it today. And obviously, entrepreneurs use what they earn and put it back into their business and try to continue growing the business. Now, this is the business environment, and you can see this in your text. It's a pretty good wheel here. That's on page 11 in the text. It's figure 1.3. And you'll see, I'll blow this up just a little bit. I don't want to get it past what we have here on the screen. And you'll see this. Here we have a technological environment, social environment, competitive environment, and then economic and legal environment. And we don't need to go through all of these because it's a little busy. It's a little bit too much to try to get into our mind. But we need to think about all of these things being in a wheel. And the business environment, it encompasses all this. Notice down here it talks about free trade. It talks about quality imperative. It talks about global competition and obviously the global environment. And this is very important. Free trade is what the United States is built on, and what we're coming to understand and have been coming to understand in the last few years is it is imperative to produce quality products. The mantra today is not only to meet your customers' needs, but to exceed them and gain greater satisfaction. And I'll pull this down just a little bit. Now this slide here talks about government's role in business. Government in the United States, obviously, the government does not tell anybody that you can't start a business. Now, governments may tell you you cannot start a certain type of business where you want to start for various and sundry reasons. But they don't tell you you can't start a business. They don't say, Johnny Kelly can't start a business, but Susie Smith can. They don't do that. There's a lot of freedom here allowed to us. We want to see laws that are passed that promote business. And obviously, we want to be able to write enforceable contracts. We'll talk about that a little bit later when we get to the legal environment of business in one of the bonus chapters. We want to have a currency that is recognized worldwide and is traded worldwide. And last, and there's other things here that are very important, but we have to minimize corruption. You will read, well, I can't say what you read because I don't know what you do read. And I don't know how often you'll find this on the internet, but we find stories in the New York Times that I get on the weekend and other papers, USA, they talk about countries that are bogged down because there's a lot of corruption. People are paid off to allow other people to do business, et cetera, et cetera. We don't have that in the United States. And when that's found out, people are taken to court, and that ends that. This slide just tells about least corrupt countries worldwide. Notice the United States is not in the top 5. I think we need to work on that to make sure we get into the top 5 where we belong. And this talks about the countries that have most corruption worldwide. Now, this particular slide, we used to do these as assignments. We don't do this any longer. Ethics begins with you making ethical decisions. You'll find one in each chapter. I encourage you to read them and just to think through them. It won't take you very long. And think about this, because we need to think about making decisions with ethics in mind as well as making decisions. And we'll talk about ethical responsibility in chapter 4. We know that we are doing things today with technology we've never done before. It increases our effectiveness, increases our efficiency, and hopefully increases our productivity. By taking people away, using technology properly, we can take people away from routine, mundane tasks. Let the technology do that for us and free people up to do other things. We probably fuss on a regular basis, I know I do, about talking to an automated operator. But what the company is doing there is promoting efficiency and getting its individual employees away from answering the telephone and just answering the telephone. I'm not talking about answering customer inquiries, away from answering the telephone and directing calls certain places and empower them to do other type things. This is just a slide about JCPenney keeping in touch, and I'm not going to discuss that. You will find this in your text, and certainly you can look at it if it's something that interests you. E-commerce. I don't think we have an idea yet about how far e-commerce is going to go, how far it's going to take us, and what changes are going to be made. E-commerce. 2 types of e-commerce. B2C, that's business to consumer, and B2B, business to business. And we'll talk about those a little bit later in the course. Those particular ones, not necessarily in e-commerce area, but just in the regular area. And of course, it can be expanded to e-commerce. Something we have to be concerned about, databases and identity theft. It's very important. You need to make sure if you're into this business, you're in the business and you have some type of database, or you have some type of information that can be hacked into, you need to do whatever you can to protect it. It's very important. When you're dealing with people, you never give out personal information unless you're the one that initiates the phone call. Somebody calls you up and asks for some of this type of information, just hang up the phone. They ask for it through the computer, getting a blind email, block the email, block sender, whatever it takes. You just don't want to get into that type of nonsense. This is just telling you ways to protect your privacy and protect being hacked for identity theft. Shred documents that contain personal information, and don't give out things. Use strong passwords. Most of us don't do that. You should make up a password that has no connection to you. Don't use your birth month or your age, or reverse those numbers or things of that nature. Difficult, but something that you really need to do to protect yourself. And then, obviously, or don't click on suspicious email. Don't pay attention to it. Not always easy to do, but to try to do it as best you can. Now, here we have the first thing that really is a conundrum for Americans. We want quality merchandise, but at the lowest possible price, and then we want excellent customer service. I like to use a statement and say to you, you're going to get what you pay for. If you shop at a discount store, you need to understand that the merchandise is most likely not going to be top quality. So you need to understand that. Empowerment, this is a mantra that's coming along. This is simply pushing down responsibility and authority to make decisions to the lowest possible level. I'll give you one little qualification to this. If you're going to empower people, you must empower them and don't micromanage them. Now, if you've done that and an employee makes a decision that you do not like, you need to call the employee aside and say, that's not the right way to do this, do it some other way the next time, etc. But you have to back up that employee. You can't berate them and cut the legs out from underneath that person, because they're not going to act the next time. They're going to wait for you to come around, and it just destroys what you're trying to do. Demographics. This is just a study of the population in which you're trying to do business and breaking it down by a number of different categories. Age, could be national origin, it could be gender, it could be college education, it could be any number of type things. And that's what you're trying to go after, that particular type of market. And this particular slide is a demographic slide of age in the United States, and giving you some kind of an idea of the age spread where people are. We know this is going to change over a period of time. And notice this is 3 years old right now. And this gives us the projected demography based on an age, by race, and by 2050. Please note that the white population will still be the largest, but it will no longer be a majority. Now, I have seen data that says it's actually going to occur before 2050, but this is from the Census Bureau, so I think we probably ought to stick with that. This is just giving the states with the greatest percent of population increase in Hispanics. or actually, well, it says rise of Hispanic population. New Mexico and California, Texas, Arizona, and Nevada have always had substantial Hispanic populations, but it has been growing, and then gives you the states with the smallest Hispanic population. And we know that this is going to change. It's going to change the way businesses operate. It's going to change the way businesses target their markets, and it's just something that we have to learn that is changing. Single family households, we have more working mothers, we have a number of things we have to be concerned about. And notice one of the things it talks about down here: single parents are concerned about child care. Well, I think we all should be concerned about, but that's probably a primary concern for a single parent. This talks about Social Security. I don't want to get into this too much. This is a contentious issue. We know that it's going down, but if the population shifts, it may go up, and there are going to be some changes in Social Security. We just don't know what they're going to be. These are people who are worried about Social Security, what they think, people who've been surveyed, what they think is going to happen. 43% of the people think it's in serious trouble. 26% think it's in crisis. So that gets us to 69%. Something will be done. We don't know what it will be done. We can only hope that the people we elect to represent us in Congress have the fortitude to come up with something that is viable and doesn't punish people at all. We know that competition is more today than it's ever been. We know China is around. We have to be ever vigilant about increasing free trade, the removal of tariffs and other barriers to trade. And a lot of this, of course, is happening based upon our advances in being able to communicate. This just gives us the world's largest cities, what they used to be and where they are today. Not something I want to talk about a whole lot, but notice that New York was at the New York area was number one in 1950, and it's not in the top 5 today. We have to be concerned about a global environment because we have to be careful about what we're doing and how we're doing it, where our tax dollars are going, and whether or not we want to continue to do some of the things that we've done, or we want to divert our money to where it should be spent on the American people. Companies are paying attention to going green. It's very important we do this. Trying to save less energy, trying to use fewer resources, and trying to cause less harm to the environment. I don't care whether you believe in global warming or not. What I can tell you is that we only have one environment, and we need to do our level best to keep it, regardless of whether you're a global warming fan or not. These are just things that you can do yourself to help the environment. Buy things that are reusable, do more recycling. How many people recycle? A lot of people don't. I lived in when I was in the Army. I lived in Newport News, Virginia, and they had a very high recycling program, but only 25% of the people did. We recycle more, we can reduce costs, et cetera, et cetera. Buy a hybrid car. Now you have to understand something. If you buy a hybrid car, you're not going to get a return on your dollar as quickly as you think you will. My wife and I have had a hybrid car for several years, and we're doing something as a statement for the environment. Yeah, we're probably going to save some money in the long run, but we're not going to get that money back very quickly. Evolution of business in the United States, we've gone from an agrarian society back at the time that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were signed, 1776, and later 1787, 1788, to manufacturing to service to information-based era. Now, that doesn't mean to say we're not still doing other those things, but our economy is no longer based on agriculture, etc. Agricultural era, 1800s to the early 1900s. And as more factories started and more people started moving to the cities, we had fewer farms, and there was more larger farms came out of that. We then went to the manufacturing area, which we talked about, and we notice here the last bullet, as we improved our efficiency, as we improved our ability to produce, fewer and fewer workers were needed. One of the big challenges we have is those jobs where people came out of high school and didn't have any further education and went to work in some factories and made a very decent living. A lot of those jobs are gone. So we have to think about what it is we can do within our society to reinvent that and to bring that type of job, that type of earning power, that type of job, that type of earning power back. And the service area, what we're talking about, notice it now makes up over 2/3 of our economy, and with many high-paying jobs there in the general computer industry, etc. Information technology growing exponentially. It affects every walk of life. You simply can't do your job today in most every area without having some relationship to technology. And that brings us to the end of chapter 1. So we are now at 5:13. I'd like for you to take a 5-minute break. Come back at 5:18, and we will begin chapter 2. Thank you. Well, it's 5:18. We're back. Chapter 2, Understanding Economics and How It Affects Business. In this chapter, we're going to present the three major economic systems in the world. Capitalism, United States, I prefer to call it free market system, or market-based economy. Of course, then socialism, which we find in many European countries and other countries around the world. And finally, communism, which we still find in the most populous country in the world, China. But it's the government. It's not business that's being controlled by communism to the extent that it was just 10 or 15 years ago. So our learning goals for this particular chapter, chapter 2, are explain the basic economics, what capitalism and how free markets work. And we're going to compare socialism and communism. And then we're going to look at the trend today to mixed economies, which really exemplifies the United States more than simply market-based economy. Economic system of the U.S., including its significance and key economic indicators like the GDP, productivity, and the business cycle. And then we're going to contrast fiscal policy and monetary policy. Now, by the way, we'll get to these fiscal and monetary policy a little deeper when we get to chapters 19 and 20 and explain how each of these affects the economy. This gentleman, John Maynard Keynes, pronounced as C-A-Y-N-E-S, had a profound effect on the economy of the United States. He believed when a country was in recession that it was the government that needed to spend money to get the economy moving again. Notice he wrote the General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money in 1936, and he profoundly affected many people in government for a long period of time. Keynes has fallen out of favor a little bit for another school of thought, but he is still around. Still, his theories and policies still have great influence on many countries and still in the United States. Economics is the study of how society employs its resources to produce goods and services that are obviously consumed by individuals and organizations. And it is divided into two parts: macroeconomics, which talks about how a government operates and how it, in some fashion, controls the overall economy of the country. And then microeconomics talks about individuals and how we behave in spending our scarce resources, dollars, in chase of other scarce resources. And of course, one of the things that you need to know, we probably will talk about this a little bit later on, it is us, the individual consumer, who is telling the producers in the world what to make, because we're telling them what we're going to buy and at what price we're going to buy, etc. Resource development, it just studies how resources are created and the conditions that will make them better. Now, here are some ways that we can increase our resources and at the same time conserve resources. Using hydrogen as a fuel. And that is coming. We're going to see that. We're going to see electric cars. Cars that are going to run now. But interestingly enough, we had electric cars back at the turn of the 20th century. And new ways of growing food, and then new ways of creating goods and services. Some of these have some of these have caught on, others have not. Now, Thomas Malthus was an economist back in the late 1700s, I believe, maybe even 1800s. I don't have that right in front of me. But he believed that the rich had the most wealth, but it was the poor who had the most population, and because of this, resources would run out. Well, that hasn't happened, and it caused a contemporary of his, Thomas Carlyle, as the slide says here, to refer to economics as the dismal science. Now remember, we still have Malthus around, and people who still follow Malthus and his theories and ideas. These folks are called neo-Malthusians, and they still believe there are too many people in the world. And of course, these are the folks that promote birth control, among other things. Now, of course, as you should know, if you do not, there are countries that have that in their in how they operate, and so they will. China, for instance, had a one-child policy for a long period of time. Now, China has relaxed that in some cases for some ethnic groups, but they still promote that one-child policy fairly strongly. Now, this is in contrary to Malthus, that believe that a large population can be a resource, especially if it's educated. And we need to have business owners who have the freedom to create jobs for other people that will be for the betterment of society and for communities, as well as the individual. Again, we have a focus on being green, and I'm not going to talk about this a whole lot, but these are things that we need to think about, again, to protect the environment and to conserve our resources as best as possible. There's a finite number of resources, and I think we need to remember that and to do everything we can to make sure that those resources are still around for our children and grandchildren to use. Adam Smith was I suppose best to say, the father of economics. He wrote a book that is commonly called The Wealth of Nations. That's not the correct title, and you can see the correct title on page 33 in your text. It's an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. But he believed, and notice here, we talked about this before, that people need to be free to do things, to start businesses. And if you don't have freedom, that's going to cause a lot of problems. And the freedom extends to owning property, owning a business, and having the right to keep all the business's profits for yourself. And he also believed that people who work hard, people will work hard if they believe they're going to be rewarded. That can be in salaries, it can be in promotions, it could be in any number of type things. Now, he also believed that we had this thing he called the invisible hand, and it's when, as notice here, and I want to read this to you. I don't normally like to do this, but it's very important because to get this in our mind. When self-directed gain leads to social and economic benefits for the whole community. So he believed that there was an invisible hand there that helped direct us at things. Now, there's one thing that we need to remember about Smith, and this is not meant to be negative, but I think we need to look at this, and we'll talk about this invisible hand theory a little bit more here in a second. Under Smith's theory, no one person can be made better off without another person being made less well off. Now, let's take this as an example. suppose you and a friend of yours, well, let's say friend, a colleague, are up for promotion, and one of you is going to get the promotion, one of you is not. So you get the promotion, and you're going to earn an extra $10,000 a year. So your colleague, your business colleague, is not making any less money, but in comparison to you, after you're getting this extra $10,000 a year, that person is less well off. Now, that's not bad, but we have to look at it in that perspective. So here what he's talking about, visible hand, a farmer grows crops. He takes the crops to market, makes some money. He's able to buy, he's able to hire more people to help him with the farm. More people help him with the farm allows him to grow more crop. And as he grows more crop, he's able to help feed the community, obviously makes more money and pay his farm hands. So we have a symbiotic relationship here. We have the farmer benefiting, we have the farmer's employees, farm hands benefiting, and we have the community benefiting. Excuse me, I just went back the slide. I didn't mean to do that. Now we have to be careful about corruption. I've talked about this before. And this is a making ethical decision. It's in your text. I asked, again, I suggest that you read it, something not required. But we learn from these things when we go through the process of reading and then at least mentally answering the questions that are posed. Now, this is the system that we live under, capitalism. I like to call it a market economy or free market economy. Countries that have capitalist foundations, United States, England, Canada, Australia. Now, under a capitalist system, almost all the factors of production are owned privately, owned by individuals. Sometimes they're corporations. Corporations, for the most part, are owned by their stockholders, who are individuals. And the government is not involved in that. And these people are allowed to make a profit, and they're allowed to keep all that profit to themselves. They don't have to share it with anybody. That's not required. State capitalism is a little bit different. We do have private ownership, although private ownership tends to be small businesses. But the state runs most of the large businesses. Countries that practice state capitalism are China and Russia. They've experienced some success as they move to capitalism, but China is really faced with a lot of corruption, and its new leader over there is on a mission to eliminate corruption. There was just a big article in the New York Times this past weekend about a local party chief being sacked because he is being convicted of corruption. We don't know how well this is going to play out with these folks in the state capitalism. This particular slide talks about small loans making a big difference. I'm not going to go into this. You can see this in your text, Spotlight on Small Business, and read it at your leisure. Again, not something that's required, but I think it is interesting reading for you. Now, these are the 4 basic rights of capitalism. You can own property. You can have a business and keep all the profits yourself. You don't have to share them with anybody. Obviously, you have to pay taxes, but that's not talking about profit. You have a freedom of competition. You can compete. You don't have to compete. It's up to you how you want to do that. And you can choose whatever you want to do. Now, of course, we have to stop and say something here, as long as it's not illegal. But yeah, you're allowed to do those four things, and those are the basic tenets in capitalism. Franklin Roosevelt added 4 additional rights, and I think these are important to look at and to read. Freedom of speech and expression, of course, that's an extension of the First Amendment to the Constitution. Freedom to worship, again, that's an extension of the First Amendment to the Constitution. Freedom from want, which is not part of the Constitution. And then freedom from fear, again, not part of the Constitution. Now, I would like to think that we could do something about this freedom from want, because we have entirely too many people in the United States that do have want. And we're talking about basic necessities. Now, free market, that's where we are. You and I, we're the consumers. We tell the people that make things, this is what we're going to buy, and this is the price we're going to pay for it. And if they don't make those things and they don't make them at the price we want, we're going to take our business someplace else. Price tells the company how much they can produce. And notice that if we want something but we can't get it, the price is going to go up. And it will stay up until more product is on the market, and then it will go down. Of course, what people will do in the meantime is they will look for substitutes or alternatives. And when they find those, and enough of those, then it's going to cause the company that is producing and holding the price up to make some change. The consumer is in the driver's seat. We don't think about that, but the consumer is in the driver's seat. This is the circular flow model here. It talks about payments, goods and services, buying power. We see the households on one side. We see businesses on the other. Now, this is the pricing thing we were talking about. And it talks here, a manufacturer makes something and he wants to sell it, or she wants to sell it for 50 bucks, but not too many people buy them. So, and we're talking about shirts here, mostly t-shirts. So he or she reduces the price to 30 and to get more people. So the producer establishes the price of $30, and he knows that, or she knows that, because that's where people are going to buy. So let's look at this graphically here. We have two things that we'll talk about this. One is supply, and the other is demand. So here are, notice the quantity of t-shirts sold, and they're going to sell them at different prices, and we see what's happening here. So we see the supply curve. Quantities of product businesses are willing to sell at different prices. That's the supply curve. Now we need to look at the demand curve, which is a little bit different than the supply curve. Supply curve is what the company is going to supply, but the demand is what we want to buy. And it's the quantities of products that we're willing to buy at specified prices. And we're going to buy more, as the slide says, when the price is lower than we're going to buy when the price is higher. And so what we try to find, what businesses try to find, is what's known as the equilibrium. And that is the place where the supply and demand meet. Notice the equilibrium point, quantity of t-shirts is $25, and the price is going to be $15. Now, there are different types of competition that we need to look at. There's perfect competition, which really does not exist. There's monopolistic competition. There's an oligopoly, and there is a monopoly. Free markets, benefits and limitation. Benefits, it allows open competition. It's not controlled. And it provides opportunities, at least we hope, for people on the lower end of the economic ladder to rise above by getting jobs and improving themselves. Notice what we find as a minus. People get greedy. And when greed enters in, we just don't know what's going to happen. Individual tax rates around the world, whether they're high or low, and you can look at this and make up your mind. You'll notice that many of the European countries, such as Belgium, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, have tax rates that far exceed the United States. Now, these are just typical taxes. We're not going to go into this. Some strange taxes. I said strange taxes in the United States. And again, it's not something that I'm going to talk about because it's conversation and not anything other than that. Socialism we touched on just a little bit before, but we're going to talk on again here now. This is a system of economics where you do have small entrepreneurs, but the government runs most of the large businesses. Citizens are highly taxed, but there's a safety net that takes people from cradle to grave. So a lot of the basic services are paid for by these high taxes. Here are some of the benefits we talked about before: education, healthcare, childcare, etc. One of the things here is shorter work weeks. There's been a big fuss in some of the European countries, especially France, that the work week has been cut too low. Now, what's going to happen there, I really don't know. But longer vacations are the norm in Europe. Here are some negatives. Many people feel that it causes a brain drain because there are few incentives for people to take risk. And some of the best and brightest move out and go to capitalistic countries. And as we see here, because if people aren't willing to take risk, there's a chance there'll be fewer inventions and less innovation, because the reward is much smaller. Communism, on the other hand, is a type of economy where the government makes all the decisions. Now, the slide says almost all, but I would differ with that. The only people that I've ever known, and I'm not living in a communist country, so what I know is what I've read. The only people who would be allowed to make any decisions would be farmers. Most of those people are subsistence farmers. They're growing food for themselves. If they had a surplus, it would have to be sold to the government. Notice here, prices don't reflect demand, which may lead to shortages. Now, years ago, American television would show Russian people lining up for bread. And it would be lines that went around the block going to the bakery to get a loaf of bread. And at some point, the bread would be gone and the line would still be long. What the communists would say is, well, we produced what we thought we were going to produce and no more. There was a lot of graft and a lot of corruption that went on. People who ran a bakery would take loaves of bread out, keep them for themselves and things of that nature. So it's really not a very efficient system. And it just doesn't promote entrepreneurship. It doesn't promote innovation. It doesn't promote invention. Yes, Russia did do some inventions. I'm using them because they were the best known communist country. I mean, China certainly was, but China wasn't producing like Russia was in those days. A lot of the inventions that they came up with and forward-leaning were government supported, seldom done by normal people like who did not work for the government. Now, these are the two major governments economy. We have free market economy, which we know about, we talked about. Command economies, that's communism, where the government makes virtually all the decisions. What gets produced, who's going to get what it is, et cetera, et cetera. Mixed economies is something we're finding the United States in, where the government does some allocation of resources. Now, we have that in some respects when we look at our utilities. Gas and electricity, natural gas and electricity are regulated utilities, regulated by government, usually a state government. So we find that many countries are moving to a mixed economy today. And that's exactly what this says. We don't have too many communist countries, too many communist economies. China is still communist, but the economy certainly cannot be considered. It says here that socialist countries are cutting back on things like education, et cetera. I've not seen any evidence to that. I won't say that the authors are wrong, but I've not seen any evidence of that across the board. There may be some countries doing that. Some of the safety net is being changed. Certainly happened in France and maybe another country or two. So we may see some of that, but I think it's too early to say it's changing. Although we do see the United States getting more into safety net type things. China is a changing economy. I'm not going to speak to this too much. We sort of talked about it for a number of times. China is really concerned, as it says here, about housing. It's concerned about inflation. It's concerned about a number of things. They have more and more people moving to the cities. China has a huge pollution problem and it cannot get under control, and it's going to probably cause them quite a bit of disturbance in the future. Gross domestic product, that's the total value of final goods and services produced in a country within a year. And as long as a company is within the border, our numbers go into the GDP. Toyotas go into our GDP. What made in Georgetown, Kentucky goes into our GDP. And of course, when the GDP is rising, businesses reflect that, and of course, it reflects on the average person as well. This is our GDP going back from 1950 in billions to 2010, where we are in trillions. And these are GDPs of other countries. Unemployment is a concern of ours. Our unemployment is still a little higher than what the government would like. Pardon me. Unemployment rate. I prefer to use the term employment rate because employment rate's a positive number and unemployment's a negative number. But it's everyone who is 16 years of age or older who is not institutionalized, and the person has tried to find work within the past 4 weeks. 4 types of unemployment: frictional, structural, cyclical, and seasonal. This is the unemployment rate in the United States. It's as of 2011, as of today, it's 7.1. I think it maybe it's had higher than that, and obviously it's higher than what we would like for it to be. This is just another slide. Best places to find a job, worst places to find a job. Inflation is the consistent rise of prices over time. Disinflation is the reverse. Deflation is declining when there are too few dollars chasing too many goods. And stagflation says the economy is slowing and we're probably going to head into recession. Notice also it says that prices are going up. Consumer Price Index, a lot of complaint about this. Some people don't think it's a very accurate figure. Monthly statistics of market basket prices. It measures the where we are in either inflation or deflation. It's a cost of a certain number of goods and services over a period of time. And then we have some other things that go into wages, rents, and leases, etc. But some people don't feel that's a very accurate figure and would like to see that changed. The government hasn't changed that in a long period of time. I don't think we're going to see any change anytime soon. Producer Price Index, that just tells us what the cost of goods are at the wholesale level. Productivity. Productivity continues to increase in the United States because we've become more efficient. And notice in the service sector tends to be slower, however, because there are fewer innovations. Now, while there are fewer innovations, we might find that higher productivity is going to reduce prices, because if you have higher productivity, the correlation with that is you need fewer workers. So as we get new technology, we're able to do away with the number of workers we have. So notice the quality of service increases, but not the workers' output. Now, new technology adds to the quality of services provided, but not to the workers' output. So we need to have a different form of measurement that accounts for quality as well as quantity. The next thing we're talking here about is the business cycle. We go through 4 distinct phases: boom, recession, depression, and then recovery. I like to start here, just interject. I'm not going to read these things to you because you can figure out what they are. Depression is a severe recession. The reason that depression was used when the depression hit began in 1929 is because the folks in government thought recession was too strong a word. Fiscal policy is set by the federal government. It revolves around taxation and government spending. Of course, we have things we have to be concerned about. The national deficit. We're spending more, we're taking in. National deficit tells us, or national debt tells us what the deficit is at a particular period of time. And then the surplus, obviously, we're taking in more than we're paying out. This is our national debt. Not something I'm going to talk about. It's something that some people think you should be concerned about and others don't. This is what so many dollars can buy for you. This is one of these gee whiz slides like I like to talk about, and I don't think we're going to spend any time on that at all. And then finally, monetary policy. And again, we're going to talk about this more when we get into the Federal Reserve part of this back in chapter 20 and talking about money, et cetera. It's the money supply and the interest rates that's set by the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve Bank, also known as the Fed. The Fed is interested in the economy. It is also interested in the unemployment rate. And it does things with monetary policy to try to influence the unemployment rate. Fed has had some success in doing this. And of course, there are many, many people who don't like the Fed and think it ought to go out of existence. So I'm not going to go there. That's not part of this business. Think about what's on this slide and just understand we're going to talk about this in greater detail when we get to chapters 19 and 20. It is now 5:53. I'd like to take, or it just went to 5:54. I'd like to take a 5-minute break and come back at 5:59, and we will get into chapter 3. Thank you. We're back. It's 5:59. We're getting into Chapter 3, Doing Business in Global Markets. Our learning goals are to discuss the importance of global markets and look at the role of comparative and absolute advantage. Explain the importance of importing and exporting. Look at the strategies used to reach global markets. Evaluate the forces that affect trading in global markets. Right, the advantages and disadvantages of trade protectionism. I can't think of any advantages. And then discuss changing landscape of the global market and the issue of offshore outsourcing. Notice it says over 90% of businesses do business globally. And I don't know how well you can see this slide. You can find it in figure 3.1 in your text, the population of the world. North America, which of course includes Canada and Mexico, has 7.4% of the world's population, whereas Asia has 16.2%, and Europe is over 10%, and Africa is almost 15%. Two things we need to think about: importing and exporting. Importing is when we're bringing goods into this country that are not made here, and we're bringing them over to sell them. And exporting is selling our goods, or selling goods abroad that are made here in the United States. Notice that we're the largest importing, but also the third largest exporting country. So we do have a lot both coming in and going out. This slide just talks about the pleasure of doing business. We note here that the best countries for business actually tends to be Denmark. We're ranked at number 9 in 2000, and this is 2010. In 2009, we were ranked number 2. So we need to get back up to where we should be. This is just a notional slide that I'm not going to talk about billionaires in other countries. And it's interesting, but not really germane to what we want to talk about. Trading with other nations. We simply have to do that because that's where we are today. We can't sit on our laurels and not trade with other countries. Yeah, we do do a lot of business within the United States. There's no question about that. But we need to trade with other countries. And notice the countries that have a lot of resources, like Venezuela and Russia, need technology to be able to produce those. And so we need to be able to trade globally, but the focus has to be on free trade. That's the unimpeded movement of goods and services across geographical boundaries. This is how exports affect GDP. Notice that our exports are 11% of our GDP, whereas the rest of our GDP is 89%. how exports affect Germany, just the reverse. 35% of their economy of GDP comes from exports, 65% not. Free trade benefits everybody. We need to think about that. We see here that literacy rates have increased over 30% from in the last 61 years. And the life expectancy has gone up almost 30 years. Some of that can be directly attributed to trade. Our competitive advantage simply says what a country can produce most efficiently it should sell, and the things that it cannot produce most efficiently it should buy. Absolute advantage is when one country has a monopoly over everything, and it can do it better than anybody else can do it. And it's a specific product. We normally hear about diamonds in this category. Many small businesses are going to go global, so if you work for a small business, don't think you're not going to be going global. Notice what the president wants to do. He wants small businesses to double exports in the next 2 years. Well, excuse me, by the next year. This is who we owe money to, and I'm not going to get into that. That tends to be a political football. We try to get more people involved in importing. Notice here about students abroad tend to notice products that they're used to and are not available where they are now. So we're trying to get some stuff taken care of that. By working with producers in our native country, some become importers while still in school. Exporting, we know, boosts the economy. This slide is an interesting slide. We don't need to talk about it a great deal, but talks about if we invest $1 billion in exporting, we'll create approximately 7,000 jobs. Now we measure this global trade by the balance of trade, trade surplus, and then the trade deficit. Obviously, balance of trade is what it is. Imports coming in, exports going out over a particular period. Trade surplus in our favor, trade deficit is not in our favor. Balance of payments is what we owe other countries, the difference between what's coming in and what's going out. Obviously, we want more money coming in than going out, and the reverse is what it is. Now, these are some things we really have a problem with here. And there was a big article in one of the local newspapers today about unfair trade practices and things like called dumping and selling below cost. Dumping is prohibited, but it is often very difficult to catch. Lists the number of companies that do this. China and Russia certainly do. But we also find that countries that we are friendly with, such as Brazil and South Korea, are guilty of doing the same thing. And we need to make sure we're watching this, because when companies come in, when countries come in and dump, that's costing American jobs. Now, here's how companies reach global markets. Pardon me. They do it through a number of ways. this is showing how much involvement there is. We have a number of things going from licensing to foreign direct investment. Licensing is down at the bottom, whereas foreign direct investment is at the top. And notice there's various amounts of risk and potential for profit, etc. Licensing is what it is. American company provides the right to manufacture its product, including a trademark, to a foreign company, licensee, for a fee, also called a royalty. This can help you get in there by getting a profit that you wouldn't get otherwise, and it doesn't take a lot of money to do this. Company is going to get export assistance from the United States, export trading centers, and export assistance centers. Franchising. We know what franchising is, and we're going to talk more about franchising when we get to chapters 5 and chapter 6. But this is where there's an agreement that somebody is allowed to sell a good or a product for others, and they get the right to use the name, and they have a specified area of operations. You have to be careful about doing this because the product has to adapt to the geographical area in which it's being sold. There are some top ones here, and everybody doesn't like the same amount of food. We should know that, but we don't always think about it. Here's what Dunkin' Donuts does in various parts of the world. In Taiwan, for instance. We also find McDonald's in many places in the world. And if you want to get a beer in Germany and have a Big Mac, you can do that. You can't have a Big Mac and beer in the United States unless you buy the Big Mac at McDonald's and then take it home and have a beer. Just some things that McDonald's are doing differently. Now, contract manufacturing is another way to get into the global marketplace. And this is where a foreign company produces private label goods for the host country being the United States, domestic country, it says here. And then it puts its own label on it. That's kind of outsourcing, as it says here. Now, contract manufacturing can be used to, company can experiment in a new market. Is that going to cost them a lot to start it because they have a partner? And then it helps them do some other things as well. A joint venture is exactly what it says. This is where companies get together. Companies from different countries get together, and they will get together to do as it says here, a major product. As a matter of fact, you'll see this in some respects in the C2M Hill video. So you've got some things here that go on. Each company from a different country has a shared risk, and they also share technology. Marketing and management expertise can be shared, and then it is easier in many cases to enter into a foreign market where you already have a partner, a joint venture, because sometimes you can't do that. So it's something that you're allowed to do because product is going to be made where you want it to be made. Strategic alliances, as it says here, are long-term partnerships between two or more firms that tend to be competitive in the same business, but it helps them go into different markets. Notice they don't typically share costs or risks, management, or profits. It does give you broad access to the market, but there's some downers to this, so you have to be careful about doing that. The one joint venture that I remember was between Toyota and General Motors, and it was to be conducted in California. Some reason it did get off the ground. They did have some operation there for a while, but it was eventually ended, and I can't tell you any more about it than that. Foreign direct investment. That's where you buy property and businesses in a foreign country. A foreign subsidy is a little bit different than that, where a company owned in a foreign country by another company called a parent company. That's the most common form of foreign direct investment. What's the benefit? Company maintains control over its technology and expertise. However, downside is it has to commit funds within that foreign country, and if the foreign country is ripe for corruption, there's problems on the horizon. Multinational corporations, company manufactures product in many different areas, many different countries, I beg your pardon, multiple stock ownership and members and management. Every large company is not multinational, so it's something that we need to think about as well. Sovereign wealth funds, something just a little bit different. This is where investment funds are controlled by governments holding large stakes in foreign companies. You don't see a lot of the United States doing this, but you do see a lot of foreign countries doing that. Notice that geopolitical objectives, gaining control over strategic natural resources. Saudi Arabia has done this with the company they called Aramco. Used to be an arm of Aramco Oil, I think, United States, and then they changed that. Took it over. What affects foreign trade? Talks about a number of things here: socio-cultural issues, economics and finance, obviously laws and regulations, and of course then the physical environment in which you find yourself. Can we do this? Can't we do this? Etc. Cultural differences. We know that these play big parts in many phases of multinational corporations. Social mores are different. We have differences in religion, manners, values, ethics, etc. And of course, language is a barrier, and personal communication can be very difficult, if not almost impossible. Now, this is just giving you some ideas of things that we do, companies have done in trying to translate and have not done a very good job. I think I don't know that there's one here any better than another one. The one I always liked is that Chevrolet tried to sell its Nova in Mexico and places in Central America. Well, if you know a little bit about Spanish, you know that Nova means no-go. So why would anybody want to buy a car that didn't go? And Chevrolet didn't figure that out. Well, actually, General Motors, of course, didn't figure that out for a while, and finally they got the message. And then here's some things you have to be careful about that you don't want to do in various and sundry countries. And you may look at this, and I'm not going to get into this, but in the Middle East, you don't show the sole of your foot. When you're eating, you only dip into a common dish with your right hand, because that hand is okay. The left hand is considered to be impure. And there's many other things that you need to pay attention to before you try to do business or think that you're on the right track when in fact really aren't sure what you're doing in the first place. In Germany, they like titles. And a lot of people have earned doctoral degrees and they want to be called doctor or they want to be called hair doctor. And so you need to make sure that you do that. And there's some other things that you have to be careful about in Germany. Conservative business attire, don't jaywalk, things that we don't pay much attention to in the United States. Exchange rates, something we always have to be careful about, but most of us can't control. That's a relationship of our dollar to European currency being the euro, or in the United Kingdom being the pound, and then other countries, I believe Hungary is called the florin, and some other type currencies. So if the value of our dollar is good, it means that product coming in the United States are less expensive. If our dollar is lower than against another currency, that means the foreign goods coming in are more expensive. Now, the currency itself doesn't mean much to you and me. If you spend $2.50 to buy a gallon of milk and our currency fluctuates, as long as you're buying that in the United States, you're still using $2.50. But it's when you buy foreign goods and things of that nature. And then currencies, of course, as noticed here, float depending upon supply and demand. And a lot of it is influenced by currency traders. Devaluation, it just means that the worth of our money is going down. And then counter trading is a complex form of bartering. We're going to talk about bartering a little bit later on in the course. And so I'm going to wait to talk a little bit more about bartering later on. Now, these are things we have to be concerned about. There is no global system of laws. Laws don't follow from place to place. We Americans doing business overseas have to follow the law of the United States. And it's very simple. You don't follow the law and you're found to be guilty, you will be tried and most likely convicted under American law. We have to be concerned about the environment, and many developing countries really don't pay as much attention to the environment as we do. Their distribution systems, their different types of systems are much different than ours are. And their capability of technology is not quite the same. So some things we have to be careful about. You have to know what it is when you get there before you go there. Trade protectionism is simply this. Countries are trying to protect their producers at the and that negatively affects people who want to buy things. What it says here, trade protectionism, is it allows the local producer to produce and keeps the foreign product out. Many times the foreign product is better made, it's less expensive, and so the consumer is paying more money because the government thinks they have to protect their own producers. A tariff is a tax, if you will, on imports. We do this in the United States. We put tariffs on products. We like to say we don't do those things, but we do. There's two types. Protective tariff is done to keep foreign product out, and a revenue tariff is done to exactly that, to raise revenue. Import quota and embargo. Import quota says you can only import X product, X number of product in the United States. And we do limitations on that all the time. An embargo is a complete ban on any products. We have had an embargo against Cuba since 1960. And there's some other embargoes down there. North Korea falls into that. Obviously, Iran does, and there's some other ones. We have the World Trade Organization, which is came from the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which was GATT. That was around for a while, and then we morphed into the World Trade Organization, and it is set up to mediate disputes between countries over trade issues. It's supposed to be an impartial arbiter, and we do need more of that because we have a lot of protectionism going on that we don't even think about. These are the common markets that we know about. European common market. There's a common market in Asia, and there are a few other ones. These are the members of the European Union. You can see them there are a number of people that they do trading. Now, this has changed to some extent because Croatia is now part of the European Union. And there may be another country or two in there. You'll notice that there are some countries that are not. Norway, which is a little confusing, and then there's a few other ones that aren't. Switzerland, but that's the Swiss. I mean, that was going to be like that. NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Act, signed in 1994. Eliminated trade barriers between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. It helps to promote fair trade, increases investment opportunities, and then framework for further regional trade cooperation. And we try to do this. One of the things we want to do this for is because Canada and Mexico are two of our largest trading partners. We think of China and a few other people, but Canada and Mexico are two of our hugest trading partners. CAFTA, Central American Free Trade Agreement, goes back to 2005. 2005 free trade zone with the Central American governments. The only one not there listed is Belize. We're looking at new free trade agreements. We're trying to do some with South Korea, Colombia, and Panama. I've got to go back to this CAFTA here a second. Panama is not in there, and I beg your pardon for. I thought the only one was Belize. And we're also doing some type of try to move trade agreement with Asian countries. Well, the future of global trade, I suppose the best way to talk about this is the sky is the limit. China has, according to this slide, 1.3 billion people. India is not far behind. India is supposed to overtake China shortly, so something that we need to look about. We need to think about this because, pardon me, the future of business growth is more than just within the United States. Outsourcing, we know what that is. I said before, it's not always bad. There are companies that do that in the United States. Procter & Gamble struck a deal with Hewlett-Packard for Hewlett-Packard to take on its information technology business, and they do that. So that was an outsource from Procter & Gamble to Hewlett-Packard. Everybody that worked for Procter & Gamble in the IT department went over to Hewlett-Packard. Everybody was hired, and they stayed in the same place. But most of what we talk about is when companies make agreements with companies in other countries to produce a product. And therefore, we tend to lose American jobs. The payroll goes down, and it is a contentious issue. And then our final slide here that I think is something that we need to think about, and you need to think about as you're thinking about moving in business and creating new business and moving on into other things. When you're in college, you have the opportunity to study a foreign language, or even if you're not in college, or you don't have the opportunity to study a foreign language in college, you can take courses, foreign languages, try to learn one. Spanish, probably everybody in the United States should try to learn Spanish today. Find out about foreign cultures. Don't go over and embarrass yourself and embarrass the United States by doing things that you know that you shouldn't do. We don't need to do those things. We want to forge relationships with these people and do business. So we need to understand their cultures and do business the way they want business to do. And then finally, take global business courses. There's a great course here at Union, the global marketing. It's taught by John Haas, a very good individual instructor. And I recommend that to you if you have that opportunity. So you need to learn those things. You need to broaden your horizons because we're not going to just be doing business within the continental confines of the United States and then throw in Hawaii and Alaska as well. We need to think about doing other things, and we need to find ways to get to these new markets and make things better. So that brings us to the end of chapters 1, 2, and 3. We'll be back at this same time next week, and we'll get into some very interesting chapters, at least I like to think so. Chapter 4, which deals with social responsibility. And then we will talk about chapter 5, how to form a business. And then finally, chapter 6, entrepreneurship and starting a new business. Thank you and good night.